Good morning. On behalf of the Coalition on Mental Health and Substance Abuse, welcome to the final Lunch and Learn session for this spring semester. Thank you for joining us. My name is Julie Cox, an Associate Dean of Students and a member of this coalition. The purpose of the Lunch and Learn series is to raise awareness about substance abuse and mental health related issues. Attendees learn about our campus environment and ways to incorporate the information into their teaching and interactions with our students. Due to the pandemic, sessions this semester are offered through a live stream format. Today's session is entitled The Campus Improvement or the Campus Environment Through the Eyes of the Purdue Police and Fire Departments, led by John Cox, Chief of the Purdue Police Department, and Kevin Ply, Chief of the Purdue Fire Department. Thank you, Chiefs, for agreeing to serve as our presenters today. Each Lunch and Learn is 50 minutes long, so we'll run until about 12:20 today. We'll end the presentations 10 minutes early so that you have time the Chiefs have time to answer a few questions. During the presentation, please submit your questions using the Qualtrics survey located below on this site. After the presentation, we ask that you please take some time to submit feedback. The feedback you provide is critical in us providing future Lunch and Learns. So with that, I will turn it over to Chief John Cox.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your time and thank you for joining us today. What I am going to present today is just some data on some of the typical cases and calls that we run on. I've added on to what we've done in the past, and it begins to give you an idea and show you some trends and some data that might be useful. I know it's useful for us. We use it to decide how we're going to deploy resources, but it may be interesting to you as you look at your data on your student services side to determine if there's a correlation or not. So we will start the program and begin. The first slide that is up there are our calls for service. Now this trend that you see in front of you started in 2018. We pulled the data and it gives you an idea about how we are operating, the number of calls that we receive and the average response time. The interesting thing about this is that I originally titled this Policing in a Pandemic, and now we are going to post-pandemic, and it'll be interesting to see how these go. As you can see, our call response time still remains just a little over 2 minutes, and our call volume is still trending right around where we trended a year ago, but it is obviously always based on what is happening at the time. We have had a mild winter, so we have had a lot less calls for service for crashes and so on and so forth. But once we started the semester in full swing, we're noticing a pickup in our calls for service as the masking mandates have been done away with and the students are starting to get back to normal. So next slide, please. So the next slide that you have in front of you is our community policing and extra patrol events. That is a measure for us as a police department on what we're able to do. And it gives me an idea about where our officers are as far as having the ability to be able to get out and present to the community, be in the buildings, do extra patrols, do public safety presentations and programming. And as you can see, we're trending lower than we have in the past. We have our call volumes are higher now. Our criminal investigations, we've got more criminal investigations than we have had in the past year due to some of the restrictions of the pandemic. And so it'll be interesting for me as we get to the end of this quarter coming up, take a look back at some of the data it's inside of our systems to determine what the call volumes were that precluded us from being able to get out and get into the public and be more present. Next slide. So the next slide that you've got in front of you are alcohol and drug arrests. This is always a hot topic amongst our campus community. And the idea is to be able to give you a snapshot starting with 2018 and let you be able to compare semesters, quarters, and see where we are year to date. So as of year to date, today into March, our alcohol arrests are running at 27 and our drug violations are running at 31. If you take a look back on that, obviously you can see that October, December of last year, we really spiked. All of our classes were back in sessions. We still had some restrictions, but clearly our students were back on campus. And then when you look back at the previous years, January of 2020 and January 2021, we're trending up and down a little bit right in there. But that's the typical way we see when it comes to our trending in drug and alcohol. Our high times of the year are going to be around the fall semester. We drop off over the winter and then we pick back up in the spring. So it tells us that we're trending we're trending about in the right direction and we don't have any hot spot that we might need to deal with. Next slide, please. This particular slide is our thefts and criminal mischief and vandalism. So when it comes to calls for service, our biggest crime per se that we deal with are thefts and criminal mischief and vandalism. We lose millions of dollars a year in theft, personal property, university property, and vandalism to our university facilities. So this is something that we keep track of and that we work with our risk management folks to give them an idea about where we are. But again, as you can see, we're trending right along where we have back in 2019. We dropped down in 2020, 21. But again, our students are back and we're starting to see I don't want to call it the normal, but we're starting to see the typical type of criminal mischief and vandalism and theft activity that we have prior to the pandemic. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite slides to put up here with this information on it. I use this kind of slide a lot when we're talking to my staff, especially my patrol. It gives a trends and correlations type of feel, and you can take a quick look and see where we are, where we have been, and where we may go. So we use this when we're looking at putting additional staff on a particular shift. For example, we've had some trending where we have had more criminal investigations. So we added a 5th detective to our criminal investigations unit. We were successful in adding 5 additional officers positions to our patrol staff back in 2020. And we were able to get that because of this kind of data that shows some of the trending going on. So we use this kind of data all the time. If hopefully these slides will get sent out to you, you're free to ask questions. I'm always happy to, if there are particular pieces of data that you're interested in, we're happy to pull that out of our records management system. We do a lot with some of our student groups who are doing projects or programs on these things, and we're happy to share this type of information from our systems. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Chief Fly to talk a little bit about police, fire, EMS.
Okay, hello everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about ambulance response and how the use of alcohol impacts our ambulance response here on campus. For most of you already know that Purdue Fire Department provides 2 paramedic ambulances. We respond primarily to the campus, but we do respond to some of the residential areas just off campus. And we are also in a mutual aid agreement with our county ambulance service. So there are times we will run anywhere in Tippecanoe County. Primarily, it's the majority of the runs are off campus. The document you have up right now is from our website, and it just shows our annual runs. And you can look at it and see that how the pandemic really affected ambulance response or the request for ambulance service on campus. 2009, we started to drop off, and it's highlighted there as emergency medical service calls or EMS calls. In 2019, we started to just begin to drop off a little bit. And you can see the impact 2020 had, where we really dropped the number of ambulance responses we made on campus. And primarily that's because we didn't have anything going on. We didn't have events on campus. We didn't have athletic events. We didn't have club sports, which generate a lot of ambulance runs for us. A lot of those activities we didn't have during that time. And then in 2021, we started coming back to our normal run volume. And we're going to show in a minute how, with alcohol, that impacted that. Now, just because we started dropping off in 2019 and 2020 didn't mean that we weren't doing anything. The Purdue Fire Department had the transportation piece in our COVID response to the pandemic. So anytime somebody tested positive that lived in congregate housing, it was a responsibility of the Purdue Fire Department to transport them to isolation quarantine space. We also, throughout those academic years, including to even today, we provide a firefighter paramedic that works at IQH housing to provide daily wellness checks. So in 2020, we transported 2,553 people from congregate housing to isolation quarantine space. These are individuals that were either in close contact or tested positive for COVID. In 2021, we transported another 2,118 people, again from congregate housing to isolation quarantine space. With somebody out there basically staffing isolation quarantine housing daily from 7 in the morning till 10 o'clock. We did have some issues, especially in 2020 early on, where we had a lot of our Greek communities testing positive. And we did have some disciplinary issues out there in reference to alcohol. The next slide. Okay, on this one here, it basically shows you the number of EMS response or emergency medical response due to alcohol. Now, in our report writing system, there's a required field on every single ambulance call we make. The paramedic has to decide whether alcohol was a factor. It will not let them close out the ambulance report until they either check yes or no. So alcohol being a factor, it could be we're responding specifically because the person is intoxicated and needs transport to the hospital, or it could be a factor in why we were called. For example, we have people that maybe fall off their electronic skateboard, and one of the factors that contributed to that accident was they were under the influence. So the paramedic would document this. And you can see that even with the pandemic, we started dropping the numbers of responses we made specifically for alcohol-related transports to a low of the spring semester of 2020. We made 40 responses due to alcohol. That's considerably low for us. And again, a lot of those reasons, or a lot of that decrease was basically because we were not having registered functions for our Greek community. We weren't having social events on campus and things like that. So the number of alcohol-related responses dropped. Now you can see fall of 2021, we made 126 responses just for alcohol intoxication. So that number started to climb, getting back to where, and actually a little higher than we normally see in a semester. So I think the time that everybody was kind of, stuck in from COVID and everything like that, that they're trying to make up for some lost time, because we've noticed an increase right now. And then this semester has been no difference. We picked up one this morning at 7 o'clock this morning, who's found outside intoxicated. And then this weekend, we had 6 transports this weekend alone. And we anticipate as we come up to the rest of the end of the semester, we will have a relatively high number of ambulance transports due to alcohol. Typical this time of year, usually in April after spring break, I think the cool, wet weather has kept everybody kind of quiet, but typically after spring break, we see an increase of alcohol-related transports until the end of the semester. Now, we see the majority of our alcohol transports are generated from the university residence halls. And I think because we have a system in place there with the RAs, they're not doing a lot of the drinking in the residence halls, but they're going out to parties, coming back where an RA may encounter the individual. And so the policy of the university residents is they don't want the RA to make the decision whether a person can take care of themselves or not. So we encourage them to call for an ambulance. We'll let one of our firefighter paramedics check them out. If they are or have consumed alcohol, but they're able to answer questioning, they're able to care for themselves, they're able to be mobile on their own power, we will allow them to sign a refusal and remain in their residence. If they're not, we have no other choice but to, if they're not capable of making a decision on their own, or they're intoxicated to the point they're unresponsive, those generate a trip to the hospital. And the majority of them do result in ambulance transports to our local hospitals. Every once in a while, approximately 8 times per year, we have an individual that's so intoxicated that we have to take over their breathing form and maintain their airway. So this would be an individual that's so unresponsive that maybe they'll start vomiting or something like that. And they're so unresponsive that they're not able to clear their own airway, meaning they can't get that vomit out. Well, that's a true medical emergency, because at that point, they're going to aspirate that into their lungs, can result in aspiration pneumonia, and ultimately can result in death. And those are true medical emergencies. Now, again, I mentioned that most of these transports are coming out of residence halls. That's not where we're seeing these people. Very few of our transports are coming out of our Greek community, but we do know that some of our more intoxicated people are coming out, so of the Greek community. So relatively a low number of runs to the Greeks, but the ones we are taking out of there are to the point where they definitely need ambulance care. I like to share, and usually each year, I pull one of the run reports where somebody's intoxicated to the point where they cannot care for themselves. And it, again, is a true medical emergency and requires immediate action by our fire department paramedics. So I generally read the narrative to give you an idea of what it's like when we pull up and somebody is so intoxicated that we have to provide advanced care for them. So I'm going to read this narrative. Of course, I've removed all names and locations out of it. So, but Medic 17, which is one of our ambulances, was dispatched to the above location for an intoxicated patient that is unresponsive. Medic 17 and Engine 11 respond immediately with lights and siren. Arrive on scene, PUFD and PUPD personnel make their way to the patient's location. We entered the room and were directed to the bedroom where the patient was found lying on their left side. No, patient is unresponsive to all stimuli. Patient is breathing. No, patient's breathing is shallow. Patient's friend said that he had been with them for 15 minutes, but was out drinking prior to that. Bystanders are unaware of what the person has had to drink or how much. Unknown how long the patient has been in this current condition. Bystanders stated that the patient may have hit their head as well, but they were unsure. Patient's vital signs obtained as noted. A 4-lead EKG is placed on patient, noting sinus bradycardia. Nasal capnography is placed on patient. Initial end-tidal CO2 is at 55. Patient attempted to vomit. Noted that the patient's jaw is clenched. Due to patient's low Glasgow Coma scale, unresponsiveness, and potential for airway compromise, we elected to perform rapid sequence intubation. An 18 gauge IV is established in the patient's left AC. Blood glucose level checked and noted to be 150. Moved from floor to cot via sheet. Patient is secured and moved to Medic 17. On the way to Medic 17, devised Engine 11 crew to prepare equipment and medication for rapid sequence intubation. Patient was loaded in the ambulance, vital signs obtained. Patient estimated to be 100 kilogram. Patient placed on non-rebreather 15 liter per minute for pre-oxygenation. Administered 30 milligrams of etomidate and 150 milligrams of succinylcholine. Patient intubated with a 8.0 ETE tube using a King Vision scope and bougie. Visualize the vocal cords and then visualize the ET tube passing through the cords. Noted the tube placement is at 22 on the teeth. ET tube is inflated. No good return with waveform capnography. Auscultation reveals breath sounds in both lungs. Absent breath sounds in the stomach. Patient's vital signs obtained as noted. A liter bag of normal saline was hung and administered to keep open. Medic 17 transporting emergent to IU Arnett. Monitor patient condition and vital signs en route approximately every 5 minutes for change. Patient resedated with 200 milligrams of ketamine. Report called into the ER physician. Note improvement of patient's vital signs during transport. Medic 18 arrived at IU Arnett. Patient unloaded. Reconfirmed ET tube placement. Tube is again located 22 on teeth. Noted good waveform on capnography. Breath sounds equal in all fields. Absent breath sounds in his stomach. Patient moved to trauma room. Patient from cot to bed. Report given to physician and nurse at scene. Respiratory therapy assumed control of patient airway. ER staff confirms placement of tube. Patient transferred to ER department. Now, again, this is one of the extreme ones, and about 8 times per year. And I'll stop a second. We're getting a dispatch. I don't know, interfering.
Kevin, you're muted.
Okay. Sorry about that. I was just trying to cover up the dispatch. Again, about 8 times per year, we respond to a student that is so intoxicated that emergency procedures like this have place where we have to take over and control their airway through an advanced procedure such as intubation. Those individuals generally end up going up to the ICU at the local hospitals, at least for 24 hours until they can be safely extubated. And so it is a true medical emergency. And I mentioned that, we don't see this a lot, but it's about 8 times a year. Most recently, at one of the last home basketball games, we removed a female subject from the Mackey Arena who had gone out with friends pre-gaming prior to the basketball game and consumed a rather large amount of vodka. And by the time we picked her up at Mackey Arena, we removed her from the arena, got her in the ambulance. She too had to be intubated and ended up going to the ER where she spent at least a night in the ICU. So we do see it from time to time. That's the extreme. Most of them are not that extreme, but we do see, we're always concerned, like the run report documented, if it's not witnessed, whether there was a fall, any other hidden injuries. So we try to take as much care as we can. Now, Ed, if we can move to that last slide. Okay, so on the final slide, it shows you the percentage of our total ambulance runs that are alcohol related. And even though we saw that drop during the 2019-2020 academic years, we're still seeing about a total of about 12% in 2020 and 2021, about 12% of our total ambulance runs were driven by alcohol, where alcohol was a factor. Compared to 2019 and previous years, 14% is usually about our norm. And we stay pretty consistent around 14% every year, relatively high. I would say the positive thing that we see on campus, alcohol and marijuana are usually our drugs of choice. Sometimes we'll see some Adderall or something like that. Fortunately, we do not see opioids on campus. I'm thankful for that. Alcohol is probably our biggest problem. Probably grateful that we don't see the drugs like meth and heroin like our counterparts in the cities see. I think that's about all I have.
Okay, great. Well, some questions have come in as you all have been presenting. And this question could go to both of you. There was a question about Grand Prix weekend coming up, and knowing that, 2 years ago it was canceled altogether because we sent students home in March of 2020. And then this past year they ran the race, but there weren't all the events scheduled because of COVID. Knowing that alumni might come back to kind of make up for their missed Grand Prix, and also knowing that students, as you mentioned, Kevin, might be making up for lost times. Is there anything that you're all doing to prepare, or any things that you anticipate might be happening during that busy weekend?
Sure, I'll go ahead and start, and then Kevin can chime in. We both were invited to attend a meeting with Greek Life. Brandon Cutler organized it with his team, and we had a conversation with risk managers, presidents, and social chairs of the houses. There was probably 125 to 150 kids in the room, and Brandon asked how many had attended a Grand Prix before, and only about 4, I think, raised their hand. So that was a little shocking and a little concerning, but it also reminded us that there's been 2 years now where our students have not had your typical traditional Grand Prix. And so we do anticipate a large number of alumni coming back in. We've had those conversations with that organization, and we will staff up for that. We will staff as many patrol officers as we can over that, what I'll call 3-day Grand Prix weekend. And we will do the best we can. I can tell you our city are doing the same thing. And so there will be a rather, be a larger than typical officer presence in and around our community. Kevin?
Yeah, and also one of the other things that we're working on is, again, it's been a while since we had a Grand Prix weekend. Even I just got off a call with the Grand Prix organizers, and every 5 years they bring back an alumni event, and that they're bringing it back this year because of the delay of the last 2 years. Chief Cox also mentioned the program that we were at a week or so ago that Fraternity, Sorority, and Cooperative Life hosted. In addition to the Grand Prix event that's happening that weekend, we have 98 registered student events that are scheduled for the same weekend. So these are fraternities and sororities that are having social events, all kinds of activities going on campus in addition to the Grand Prix. Chief Cox and myself, we both have staff that are heavily involved with the event planning process. We're trying to get out ahead of these as much as possible. My fire inspectors are working with the Greeks to make sure if they're having an event that we're going to follow the building occupancy, exiting requirements, things like that as well. Try to be proactive leading up to the night, and then both of our departments will have a present on Grand Prix night, even into the nighttime hours.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question came up, and either one of you could respond, is if you believe in the past few years with additional states legalizing marijuana, if that has had an impact on our campus in terms of use?
Yes. So that's the short answer. The longer answer is we see a number of our out-of-state students come in, and they have to be re-educated on the laws in the state of Indiana. Most of it is single-use marijuana that they bring with them. We do partner with our residence halls from time to time and do sweeps of the mail rooms for those bigger quantities that get mailed in. But the answer is yes. It's probably part of the reason why we have increased drug activity, and it's something that we're all going to have to deal with, because I believe we're surrounded on three sides by states that have legalized marijuana.
Yeah, and again, we don't see ambulance runs. We don't see too many ambulance runs for marijuana use. Every once in a while, a couple times a year, we'll get somebody who tries it for the first time, not knowing what they're going to expect from the impact of consuming marijuana. And so they will do a wellness check. Most of those people don't need to go to the hospital. They just need to be told that this too shall pass. And so, but for ambulance response, we don't see much of the marijuana.
Okay. One thing for this audience to know is that both of our chiefs at some point will be retiring this year. So those that do know have asked a question about what you will miss the most and what you will miss the least about serving in your role and having your responsibilities.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, okay. I get to go first this time. What I will miss the most is I love the fall semester, the beginning of the fall semester. It's kind of like we get a new opportunity to start things fresh. There's a lot of activity after summer months where things have been a little quieter, maybe construction's coming to an end. But I love the fall semester where, we get new life back into the campus. So I will miss that. I will not miss at all worrying about the events and doing event planning. There are so many things that happen on this campus, and there's so much work that takes place behind the scenes to make sure those events go on without a hitch. There's so much for large scale events, planning on things that we hope never happen, but we have to plan for. So I really won't miss that.
So for me, it'll be the people and the relationships. I think that is what I enjoy most about my job, are meeting new people and building new relationships, and just getting to know those that we serve and work with. I will not miss being woken up 3 times a night, 4 times a week, or being paged, buzzed, and emailed, after I get home through the evening and so on and so forth. So I know somebody else on this video that won't miss that either. So we will, I will miss, like Kevin said, the activities of people, but not the pace of this university. From the time that I started, even in my time with West Lafayette City PD, the volume, the pace, and the increase in some of the violent crimes that we see around campus and across the river, those things will continue and will be a concern for the next chief.
Okay, along the same line, as you think not only about this past year, but in your tenure as serving as chief, what do you think are the biggest changes that you have observed about campus over time?
Okay, I'll go first. So density. When I first started here, in July of 2000. We had 30, I think it was 31,000. Today we have added 20,000 more. I think the density between when I joined and when as I leave, that's probably one of the biggest changes. The inability for students to communicate with each other. They oftentimes, and maybe the RAs and housing staff can comment on this, but it seems like it's a lot more difficult now to get students to communicate with each other. They want to do it through their phones or whatnot. And, I told the story before about officers going over to Meredith Residence Hall and meeting with two female students who were having a domestic dispute by text message. And one's eating the other one's Ritz crackers and threatening to kick their butt. And so we get a call because of the threats of intimidation, and they hadn't even spoken to each other about it. So that's a change. I think that's something that we'll have to shift back to. And I guess it behooves us to work with them to teach them how to communicate, how to problem solve, because if we don't, I think it's just going to get worse. It's probably the two biggest things that I've seen.
Yeah, like Chief Cox said, the biggest thing is, both of us have been around over 30 years. And the biggest thing is the size of the campus. The campus in the summer months used to really die out. During holidays in the summertime, the campus was a ghost town. That's not the case anymore. There's so many people on this campus, so many events, so much going on that it's 24/7. I mean, we don't have a downtime like we used to have. The communication piece that Chief Cox mentioned, the other part was just internally communicating with our campus partners. Some of the younger people on this call may not remember a time where we did not have computers at our desk or we did not have cell phones. But, when we started here, we communicated by our desktop phone or through interdepartment memo forms where you wanted to ask somebody something, you wrote it down, send it in campus mail, and they would get a response back on triplicate. You get a response back 3 or 4 days later. And that's not the case where you might respond to a couple interdepartment memo forms a day and maybe talk to 2 or 3 people on your phone. We're spending all of our time all day long and even in the evening and nighttime hours on our computer, answering emails, answering requests, and things like that. So the communication piece has just gone crazy. And that's been probably the biggest change that I can think of since I've been here 32 years.
Oh, paper memorandums. Kevin, there are people that are now thinking you're kind of a dinosaur.
I am.
It's okay. I remember it too.
I still probably have a few on my desk.
I love it. Well, there are no other questions that have come through. So at this point, I would like to thank everyone for joining us, and please ask everyone to send a warm virtual thank you to John and Kevin for sharing their presentation today. For our grant funders, it's important that we receive feedback from our attendees. So we ask that you please provide feedback on the session by clicking on the feedback link located just beneath this video. This concludes the Lunch and Learn series for this year. If you missed a session from earlier in this year, you can find the recordings of all the Lunch and Learn presentations by scrolling down on this page. Please feel free to share these resources with your colleagues. Thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.